Haredi society presents a challenge to Israel in three respects: economically, failing to integrate and contribute; militarily, dodging the burden of the IDF draft; and culturally, trying to enhance religious coercion in the public space. But Israel also presents several challenges to Haredi society. For many years, the leaders of the Haredi public have successfully coped with their surroundings through the creation of socially isolated and culturally fortified communal spaces. It is precisely the success of this model that explains why Haredim resist attempts to impose change on them. If the model works, it is not worth revising. Any possible benefits to be derived from connecting to general society, integrating into the economy, or serving in the military are deemed unworthy of the risks.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shmuel Rosner and I'm a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, JPPI. Our guest today is Daniel Goldman. He's a businessman, a philanthropist, an activist, formerly the chairperson of Gesher, the Gesher organization, and he is now the co-chair of the Coalition for Haredi Employment. So you're working to integrate Ultra-Orthodox Israelis into the workforce.
That is true.
Our topic of conversation today is Haredi society in Israel. And let me begin with a very general question. Are they truly integrating into Israeli society? What does it even mean to integrate into Israeli society?
The place to start, I think, when looking at the question is to, as you say, unpack what integration means. And I think we have two elements that really need to be separated out. One is an economic integration. So what is the role that they're playing as far as the general economic infrastructure of the country is? Are they part of the workforce? Are they a quality part of the workforce? Is there opportunity that isn't currently being utilized? And then the second element of that is the sort of social fabric question, and is the Haredi population being integrated into the social fabric of the country?
Into the culture, would you say
it's a
cultural question?
It absolutely has cultural elements to it. And I think some of the special characteristics around the history and the culture of Haredi society itself creates some sort of paradoxes around questions relating to that integration, because as soon as you say the word integration to most mainstream Haredim, they immediately have a sense of that is not something good, that is potentially something bad.
So let's begin with the economic question, because I think on the economy, it's basically, there's no debate. We agree on the aims, not necessarily on the means.
That is generally true. I think that one of the aspects of that which are important to focus on, that the language around the debate on the economic integration has also a great impact on the success of that integration, because words that are very simple and non-controversial perhaps to you and to me become extremely controversial when you're trying to, if you will, market them or indeed introduce those ideas into the Haredi community. So for you and me, career is something that we would even aspire to. If you mention to either a Haredi woman or a Haredi man that they should be thinking about career development, that's always in their mind instead of the things they should be doing, which is either raising a family or learning Torah, etc. So it is always better to be able to couch it into practical or pragmatic considerations and less about ideas and a values-based discussion.
But there are also obstacles that are technical in nature, such as the mixing of male and female in workplaces, etc.
Yeah, actually, there's probably an even bigger elephant to the quality integration that the Haredim can do into the workplace, which is actually the education system. So by choice, the Haredi system, again, if we have time, we can maybe split down that Haredim is a word that means many, many different things itself. But as a whole, the Haredi system has chosen, and with the support really of the Israeli government, to step away from any sort of high level of general studies, and in some cases from all forms of general studies. So
they graduate without having any background in English or mathematics,
yes.
and hence cannot integrate into the workforce and be
That's
of
correct.
any great value.
Over the pure economic question, you also have the social question of people fulfilling roles that are very much required in the 21st century, but they don't have the qualifications or even the ability to get qualified in those roles.
So what changes do Haredis aspire to see, and what changes they resist?
So if you speak to any meaningful leader within the Haredi community, the first and most important thing that they will say to you is that the Haredi community has never changed, the Haredi community is not changing, and the Haredi community will never change. Once everybody has agreed with that axiom, then we can start talking about the things which need changing. Exactly. Yeah. The needs of Haredi society that require solutions, as an example of how you might want to describe it, is we have a burgeoning population, okay? Every part of the Haredi community is growing faster than any other part of Israeli society.
And their level of retention is also very high, so they're not
relatively high.
World.
Again, there is difference between different communities, right. But on the whole, the retention rates are high. There is an understanding that not everybody will be capable of fulfilling the ethos of learning Torah permanently and for decades and decades, and therefore there are going to be parts of the community that will want and will need a different, let's say, educational product, something which will give them the ability to access quality employment at a later date. So that would be one area where, if you can achieve partnership with the Haredi community, change is indeed possible, and we're indeed beginning to see it. If you go back 10 years, there were more or less zero Haredim on campus in universities around Israel, and today many thousands of Haredim are trying to get degrees.
So we are still in the economic sphere, and now the question becomes how the cultural sphere moves following alterations in the economic sphere.
So, as you would expect in any very conservative society like Haredi society, what we're seeing is a movement in parallel. So we have a sort of growing margins of the Haredi community who are looking for these solutions. And by way of response, we have a super hardcore, which is actually putting up even greater barriers and things like the Peleg Yerushalmi that you read about in the newspaper here, very small but super hardcore, extremely faithful to the core values, fighting against any of these external changes. So
they become even more radical as a response to what they see in their neighborhood. Resist?
They totally understand, like almost every other extreme group within our society, that everything is the thin end of the wedge, right? The famous midon chalaklak, the thin end of the wedge that exists also for the Haredi community, and they're the ones who represent that. And in fact, what you'll tend to find is the mainstream leaders will not debate those issues with the Peleg, because in many ways they understand at an internal level that danger exists.
Now, you say this danger exists. Is it really a danger? Maybe what we have here is an opportunity, because what most Israelis would like to see is not just an altered Haredi society in the economic sphere. They also want to see cultural change.
Yeah, and here I think it's important to make a really crucial distinction. When I sort of started looking at this area, I think like most people who look at the combination of Haredim into Israeli society think, oh yes, this is an opportunity to bring the Haredim into the 21st century. And it took me a while to realize that really what I don't want to be doing is to patronize another community, even if I fundamentally disagree with their value set. So I'm not going to go, for example, to be in a separate class in university or go to separate seats in concerts, etc. But if I want the Haredim to fulfill their part within Israeli society, I need to understand that genuinely multicultural building blocks within our society have to be able to take some of those things into account. So yes, I do see great opportunity in Haredim being more involved in Israeli society, but they need to be faithful and authentic representatives of what that Haredi culture means. Along the way, like all the rest of us, things will happen to that.
Right. Now, as you know, what our book attempts to show is that Haredis in many aspects are becoming more Israelis. One of the examples that we use is the marking of Holocaust Memorial Day. You know, they have much more respect for that day than what they used to have years ago. Do you also see this process of Israelization of Haredi society happening?
So it is somewhere between Israelization and a sort of general modernization. So some of those things will have the sort of unique characteristics of being part of modern Israeli society. You mentioned Holocaust Day to a certain degree. Independence Day even has become more of a relevant, it's a day off.
But you basically say it's no less about smartphones than about Independence Day.
I absolutely think it's about a combination of those things. I think our opportunity here is actually to create a sort of unique set of windows into that Israeli experience that fit the Haredi culture. By way of example, one of the things that we're starting to see over the last couple of years are dedicated Haredi projects, which take a set of Haredi values like saying psalms or other types of more religious memorial prayers, and having that as the way to reference either the Memorial Day for Soldiers or Holocaust Day, as opposed to the more traditional putting wreaths or standing with the trumpet playing, etc.
So my question is this: are they truly Israeli patriots? Do they want to belong to Israeli society?
So the tricky part about that is you're now really diving into the identity question.
Right.
And
there we say Zionism.
Right. I try not to, is the honest answer. And sort of I take the somewhat pragmatic view that if it looks like a Zionist and smells like a Zionist and walks like a Zionist, then it's probably a Zionist. And indeed, Zionism itself in 2019 has so many different types of expressions. I think we can allow another expression of that Zionism, even if we don't have to scream it at the rooftops. But the Haredi identity is so tied up with its complex relationship with Israel as a secular, sovereign state.
Are they hurt by the fact, aware and hurt of the fact that most Israelis dislike them, don't value their contribution to the country? We measure this thing every year, and every year, time and again, we see that for most other Israelis, Haredi society is one of the least positive contributors to Israeli society.
If you prick them, they will bleed. Politically, sometimes it works in favor of those in charge, because then I can, if I can keep them ghettoed away and in a sense of I'm a minority which is being attacked and so forth, then obviously that does, it circles the wagons, and ahead of every election you'll always find some event which will allow the campaigners to then, bring everybody together. You must vote for this in order to protect the Haredi way of life. But I think underneath that there are a lot of other sort of tectonic things which are going on.
If we are speaking about an image problem, we cannot ignore the issue of military service. This is one of the main problematic points when other Israelis think about the Haredi society. Yeah. So, I'm sorry.
Right, you just say it, and it's like Again, I've had hundreds, maybe thousands of conversations on this topic both with Haredim and also with secular people and pretty much everybody else in Israeli society. And the difficulty is, on the one hand, you have the sort of moral or ethical outrage, which I think in many ways is extremely understandable, that the rest of the society says, Where do you get to decide?
I'd call it justified, not just
Yeah, no.
understandable.
Yeah,
Okay.
just absolutely.
Okay.
How do you get to decide? You're going to sit in
My
the
moral
yeshiva?
outrage.
Completely, and you are absolutely in the you're in the Gauss as far as that is concerned.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. And so first of all, I give you space to feel the outrage. Okay, I completely understand that, and we have kids, and they're going to go to the army, we ourselves, etc., and that's justified. The question then of, okay, we are where we are, the Haredim are where they are, how do we move forward with that issue? That then has to be almost divorced from that sense of outrage, because what the sense of outrage leads us to is a series of steps or policies or attempts to create policy which I don't think have any real practical ability to change the situation. So what I tend to try and get to is to a point to say, well, what do you think is a realistic outcome? Where do you think we might be as a society in 5 years or 10 years? What do you think could be achieved if you actually got some relationship of trust with Haredi society in order to change this situation? And then I think you can start to look at alternative solutions to that very difficult
like
moral
national
problem.
service or other things?
For example, national service. For example, as Bennett suggested just a few weeks ago, and he's not the first to do so, to reduce the age where people will get a release from army service in order to give better choices for Haredim to join the workforce quicker. There is debate around whether actually it's helpful to the army to suddenly have a large number of Haredim. Will it actually be a useful addition to army service? And a more evolutionary mode of change, I think, is the only one which is potentially practical. And as far as the outrage is concerned, everybody has to try and sort of figure that out.
Contain it.
Because in the end, we have to look to the sort of long run and not, how will I best feel better about myself today about that thing?
One of the questions with which we deal in the book, and it's a question I struggle with, is the question of where do we want them to live? It's a patronizing way of even talking about this, but the question of whether integration includes integrated communities, neighborhoods, cities, etc., or is it better for everybody to live separately?
So I have to say, declare an interest that in this topic I live in
Beit Shemesh,
I live in Beit Shemesh, and we've definitely been through some of the trauma that when it's done badly, it can look really bad. So let's just do practicalities for a second. As the Haredi community grows, and again, the number of young marrieds who are looking for apartments or places to live, to rent or to buy, are very high in the Haredi community, and there is not enough space, literally no space to build for them in Bnei Brak and Yerushalayim. So they are gradually moving out into other cities. So there will be the growth of the sort of homogeneous Haredi cities, and there will be more mixed cities, and so all of the big cities will have a meaningful Haredi population.
Well, the question for me is, why do we even need separate Haredi cities? Why can't we have all of them live, in Catania or Tel Aviv?
So the answer is, I don't think we should need to, in principle, and I certainly didn't make Aliyah to Israel 20-something years ago in order to live in ghettoed cities
but
from
there,
other Jews.
There is a government policy to build separately for them.
Yes.
Because it solves many problems.
It is, quote unquote, the easy solution. If you're going to do mass solutions, so we're going to do 10,000 apartments here for Haredim, I think what it does is, first of all, you are really slowing down any potential for future social or economic integration. It is much harder for homogeneous Haredi settlements to have, or cities and towns, to be more advanced in education and so forth, because they tend to be more closed off in the generality. The other thing, which is, by the way, really interesting, is that I think the level of stability for Haredim in mixed towns and neighborhoods actually at a social level, even from their internal perspective, is much greater. They're more satisfied with their Haredi way of life when they're living in a mixed city than when they're in a homogeneous city. So the social problems in Beitar Illit can't compare to the social problems for Haredim in Petach Tikva.
So looking at the future, if people read Israeli newspapers or magazines, what they come up with is one of two main themes. One is change is just around the corner. Haredis are becoming more and more Israelis, and it's no longer a problem. It just pretends to be a problem. Yeah. And the other approach is Haredis are taking over. Israelis becoming Iran. We can barely escape.
I am closer to the first than the second.
Here's a last question for you. How will this process change non-Haredi Israeli society?
Wow. So one of the things which has become quite apparent to me is that there are Haredim, people with anxieties, all over Israeli society. It isn't just limited to the Ultra-Orthodox community. And in fact, there are, you would probably know what percentage, but there is a reasonable minority of secular people in this country who are extremely anxious. They're very Haredi towards the effect of growing, Orthodoxism, and whether it be Zionist Orthodoxy or Ultra-Orthodoxy, and how that's going to start to impinge on their lives. And
so for example, when we ask people about the marriage of their offspring, which partner they prefer least, Ultra-Orthodox comes first for most secular Israelis.
And if I remember from the book, when you ask about who you'd least like to live next to.
Right, exactly.
Haredim are saying, actually, we don't really care that much.
Right, but the seculars do not want to live among or with Ultra-Orthodox Israelis.
Exactly. So I think there is a high level of anxiety with respect to that. I think it's part of the change from a single hegemony of sort of majority secular, Ashkenazi, etc., understanding that those sort of infrastructure of society is starting to shake a little bit, and I think it challenges parts of Israeli society to say, who are we? What is our identity? Where do we want this country to be going? And actually, I think it forces parts of the community to think much more deeply about how they see Israeli society going forward.
But it's not taking Israeli society towards a road at the end of which there is more poverty, less modernity.
That, of course, ties in exactly to what decisions Israeli society takes today about what opportunities it's going to open towards Haredi society or the different parts of Haredi society. And I think that beautifully sort of feeds back and says, well, if 2065, okay, the demographers are saying 50% Haredim in Israel or 40% Haredim in Israel, okay, demographers, fine. Yeah. It's definitely true there are going to be a lot more Haredim, okay? What that doesn't tell you is, what do those Haredim look like? How are they going to behave economically? What is their integration from a social perspective is going to be? How much service are they going to give to the country? What is actually national service for all of us going to look like in 2065,
when there's peace,
when of course
in the whole world.
Peace, once the political leaders of the world sort it out, of course we have full confidence. But and I think another thing which we should be considering is, what are the positive contributions that the Haredi community can make towards Israeli society in 2065.
And what are these?
I think the values of family, the values of education, the values of helping one another from inside their own community. These are things which I think in a very challenged Western society, exactly those sorts of values can come and I think at the very least have a legitimate seat at the table when we're trying to figure out what are those key values that we want for Israeli society going forward. Why would they not be acceptable to be at the table?
That's a good way to end our conversation. Daniel Goldman, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.